Welcome, dear learners. I am glad to have you with me as we begin our discussion on one of the most important foundations of human thought and social life, namely ethics. Before we move into the core content, let me clearly outline our objectives for today's session. Dear learners, the objectives for today's session are to understand the meaning and origin of ethics, distinguish ethics from morality, explain the normative nature of ethical inquiry, identify the major branches of ethics, understand key ethical theories such as utilitarianism, deontology, and virtue ethics, and finally appreciate the relevance of ethics in personal decision making and professional life. These objectives will guide our discussion and help you connect theory with real life situations. Let us begin with a simple but profound question. What is ethics? Ethics is not a distant philosophical idea that applies only to scholars or thinkers. It is something we engage with every day. When you decide whether to return extra change given by mistake at a shop, when a teacher chooses to treat all students fairly despite personal preferences, or when an organization decides whether to prioritize profit over safety, ethics is already at work. Ethics influences our daily choices, our professional conduct, and the moral climate of society as a whole. In this sense, studying ethics is not only about gaining knowledge, it's about developing moral awareness and responsibility. Dear learners, to understand ethics properly, it's useful to look at the origin of the term. The word ethics comes from the Greek word ethos, which means character, habit, or custom. Ethos refers to the inner qualities that shape a person's behavior over time. It emphasizes the idea that ethical behavior is not accidental but develops through consistent practice. At the same time, ethics is also connected to the Latin word mores, meaning customs or manners. This highlights the social dimension of ethics. It reminds us that moral behavior is shaped by shared norms and expectations within a community. Together, these roots show that ethics operates at both individual and social levels. It's about who we are as a person and how we live together as members of society. From a formal perspective, ethics is also known as moral philosophy. It's defined as the systematic study of human conduct. The term systematic is important here. Ethics does not rely on random opinions, personal likes, or emotional reactions alone. Instead, it involves careful reasoning, logical analysis, and critical reflection. Ethics seeks to determine what is right and wrong, good and bad, just and unjust in human behavior. It asks questions such as why honesty is valued, why injustice is condemned, and whether moral judgments can be justified through reason. For example, when we say that corruption is wrong, ethics demands that we explain why it is wrong, not merely state that we dislike it. Ethics is often described as the science of conduct. This does not mean that ethics uses experiments or laboratory methods like natural sciences. Rather, it means that ethics follows a disciplined and rational approach. What distinguishes ethics from disciplines like psychology or sociology is its normative nature. Psychology studies how people actually behave. Sociology examines patterns of behavior in groups and institutions. Ethics, however, is concerned with how people ought to behave. It does not stop at describing moral behavior, it evaluates it. For instance, psychology may explain why people cheat under pressure, and sociology may study how widespread cheating is in a particular system. Ethics asks the deeper question of whether cheating can ever be morally justified. This brings us to an important feature of ethics. Ethics deals with standards and ideals. It provides criteria against which actions are judged. It helps individuals and societies decide what ought to be encouraged and what ought to be discouraged. Without ethics, social life would be reduced to power, convenience, or self-interest alone. To understand the nature of ethics more clearly, scholars usually distinguish between three main areas within ethical inquiry. The first is descriptive ethics. Descriptive ethics asks the question, what do people believe is right or wrong? It's concerned with observing and describing moral beliefs and practices without judging them. For example, a researcher may study the moral values of a particular community, such as attitudes towards marriage, honesty, or authority. Descriptive ethics helps us understand moral diversity across cultures and societies. However, it does not tell us which beliefs are morally correct or preferable. The second and most central area is normative ethics. Normative ethics asks the question, how should we act? This branch seeks to establish moral principles, standards, and rules that guide behavior. When we argue that fairness is better than favoritism or that violence is morally wrong, we are engaged in normative ethics. This area is prescriptive in nature. It provides guidance and direction. Most ethical theories that you study, such as utilitarianism and deontology, belongs to normative ethics. The third area is meta-ethics. Meta-ethics goes deeper and asks questions about the nature of morality itself. It asks what moral terms such as right, wrong, good, and bad actually mean. It also examines whether moral values are objective or subjective, and whether moral truths exist independently of human opinion. For example, when we say lying is wrong, meta-ethics asks whether we are stating a fact, expressing an emotion, or giving a command. Although meta-ethics may seem abstract, it shapes how seriously we take moral claims and moral reasoning. Dear students, at this stage, it's important to clarify the distinction between ethics and morality. In everyday language, these terms are often used interchangeably, and this usually causes no confusion. However, in academic and professional contexts, a distinction is often made. Morality typically refers to personal or cultural beliefs about right and wrong. These beliefs are shaped by family, religion, tradition, and social upbringing. Morality is largely internal and personal. Ethics, on the other hand, refers to formal systems of rules and principles that govern behavior within professions, institutions, or societies. Ethics is external, systematic, and often codified. For example, a teacher may personally believe that helping a particular student more than others is morally acceptable. However, professional ethics require fairness and equal treatment. This distinction leads to an important takeaway. Ethics is not merely about feelings or religious beliefs. It's rational discipline that requires justification, consistency, and logical reasoning. Ethical judgments must be supported by arguments, not just personal preferences. With this foundation in place, let us turn to the major ethical theories that guide moral reasoning. These theories offer different answers to the questions of what makes an action morally right. One of the most influential theories is utilitarianism, also known as consequentialism. Utilitarianism holds that the moral values of an action depends on its consequences. According to this view, an action is morally right if it produces the greatest good or the least harm for the greatest number of people. This idea is known as the greatest happiness principle. Utilitarian thinking is commonly used in public policy and healthcare. For example, when a government decides how to allocate limited resources for public welfare, it often aims to maximize overall benefit. Similarly, during medical emergencies, doctors may prioritize patients with higher chances of survival. However, utilitarianism has been criticized because it may justify harming a minority if doing so benefits the majority. This raises serious concerns about justice and individual rights. A contrasting approach is deontology or duty-based ethics. Deontology argues that morality is based on duties and rules rather than consequences. Certain actions are considered inherently right or wrong regardless of outcomes. Lying, cheating, and breaking promises are often seen as morally wrong in themselves. The most influential deontologist is Immanuel Kant, who proposed the idea of the categorical imperative. Kant argued that moral actions must be based on principles that can be applied universally. Deontological ethics plays a major role in legal systems and professional codes of conduct. For example, a doctor is ethically bound to maintain patient confidentiality, even if revealing information might seem useful. The main criticism of deontology is that it can be rigid. Moral duties can conflict, and strict rules may not always account for complex situations. Dear students, another important ethical theory is virtue ethics. Virtue ethics shifts the focus from actions to character. Instead of asking what action is right, it asks what kind of person one should be. This approach traces back to Aristotle, who emphasized virtues such as honesty, courage, and fairness. Aristotle introduced the concept of eudaimonia or human flourishing. According to virtue ethics, virtues lie in a balanced mean between extremes. Courage lies between cowardice and recklessness, and generosity lies between stinginess and wastefulness. Virtue ethics is especially relevant in leadership and education. For example, a school principal who consistently demonstrates integrity and fairness sets a moral example for teachers and students alike. However, virtue ethics may provide less direct guidance in situations that require immediate decisions. Now, let us look at the relevance of ethics in professional life, because ethics becomes especially critical when individuals act not just as private persons but as professionals with authority and responsibility. The first idea here is role morality. Professionals such as engineers, doctors, teachers, and lawyers operate under ethical obligations that are different from everyday personal morality. When you enter a profession, you accept duties linked to that role. For example, a lawyer is ethically required to defend a client, even if the lawyer personally believes that the client is guilty. This duty exists because the legal system is based on fairness and due process. From a deontological perspective, ensuring a fair trial is a moral obligation, even if the outcome causes personal discomfort or does not maximize happiness. Ethics also plays a central role in building trust and reputation. Ethics is the currency of professional relationships. Colleagues and clients trust professionals because their behavior is predictable and guided by established codes of conduct. While unethical organizations may gain short-term profits, history shows that they eventually lose credibility and collapse due to loss of public trust, as seen in cases like the Enron scandal. Finally, ethics helps in managing conflicts of interest. Ethical theories allow professionals to identify situations where personal gain may compromise fairness. For instance, when a teacher tutors their own student for money, it undermines impartiality and threatens the integrity of evaluation. Such practices violate principles of justice and professional duty, highlighting why ethical awareness is essential in professional life. Dear learners, let us now turn to decision making and behavioral regulation, which explains how ethical understanding is translated into ethical action. Knowing what is right is important, but acting on it requires psychological and practical support. One influential explanation of ethical behavior is James Rest's four-component model. According to this model, ethical action occurs through four essential steps. The first step is moral sensitivity, which means recognizing that a situation involves an ethical issue. Many unethical actions occur simply because individuals fail to notice the moral dimension of a situation. The second step is moral judgment, where a person decides what the right course of action is, often by applying ethical theories such as utilitarianism or deontology. The third step is moral motivation, which involves placing moral values above competing interests like personal gain, fear, or ambition. Finally, moral character is required. This means having the courage, self-control, and persistence to carry out the ethical decision even under pressure. To support ethical decision making in real life, practical frameworks are often used. One such tool is the plus filter. This encourages individuals to ask whether an action aligns with organizational policies, legal requirements, universal ethical principles such as honesty and fairness, and one's own sense of what is right. Finally, codes of conduct serve as formal mechanisms of ethical regulation. Grounded in social contract theory, these codes represent an agreement in which professionals accept certain limitations on their freedom in exchange for trust and authority. By doing so, ethics moves beyond personal opinion and becomes enforceable, allowing institutions to guide behavior and address misconduct effectively. To conclude, ethics is not an optional or abstract subject. It is central to personal integrity, professional responsibility, and social harmony. Ethics helps us navigate complex situations, manage conflicts, and make responsible decisions in an increasingly interconnected world. Ultimately, ethics challenges us to ask not only what we should do, but who we should become. So, hope you have understood the concept and the theories that are related to the ethics. So, thank you for your time and attention.